Production of Broad and High is funded in part by the Greater Columbus Arts Council, celebrating expression, fostering talent, and connecting the community to Columbus artists, performances, exhibitions, concerts, public art, and more at columbusmakesart.com. From these contributing sponsors and viewers like you, thank you.
This time on Broad and High, meet an artist who wants to create a space where people feel like they belong. Experience the work of an artist who attempts to convey human emotion and behavior in her paintings. And hear the words and sounds of a talented rapper and hip-hop artist. This and more right now on Broad and High. Welcome to Broad and High. I'm your host, Kate Quickle. Benedict Scheuer's artwork imagines the possibilities of belonging. This message is conveyed through mediums ranging from video and performance to photography and writing. Lately, he's been painting vibrant silk canvases that both enrapture and enshroud. We followed Benedict as he crafted a beautiful silk piece outside of his Columbus studio. Watch as he incorporates the natural world into his art and finds greater meaning through the power of a drawn line.
An expression, I guess, that I think about sometimes is this idea of a banal miracle. Really basic, everyday stuff that you'll just miss if you're not paying attention. And so an example of that for me is just drawing. It is absolutely flabbergasting to me that drawing is something that we're even capable of as people. To me, it's like this condensing of like this entire outside world space coming into the body. It's circling through ourselves, and then it's just coming out at this like little bottleneck point, and something is happening there. Art is now this like space where I get to be connected to natural world. I get to maintain myself as an artist, and then in that space, I think that there's this nice way of growing as a person. I don't like to have a plan when I enter. I just kind of walk up to the paper or to the silk and take whatever tool I'm using to draw and start. And there's usually not a predetermined idea of what things are going to look like. I really enjoy the mystery and sort of just paying attention to the material itself as it's going and trying to figure out the harmony that's there, which is really just a harmony between myself, the work, and just this external space. A line carries sensitivity. If you are feeling a certain way, your line quality is going to reflect that. The silk itself is also in flux and in conversation with the atmosphere around it. If it's really dry out, the dye is going to bleed a specific way, as opposed to if it's humid, and you're going to get dramatically different results. And so that element, that sensitivity of the material, I think is one of the hugely beautiful things about it. Silk, to me, is really a really wonderful material to work with for a lot of reasons. One, it's activated by the breath. It has its own sort of presence and reminds us of ourselves. There's that lightness, it's prismatic, it's literally breaking down light in this very mysterious way. In addition to that, silk is associated with this idea of luxury, and I like to push against that a little bit. The way that I'm making is not concerned with that in the context of this silk being an expensive material, at least historically. And so I can make things a little dirtier and things messier and apply images to this material that is unexpected. And I think in that space of it being unexpected, it allows people to enter the work in a way that is a little bit less barred by these preconceived ideas of what this material is. silk is incredible because I can create an entire exhibition and I can roll it up into a single tube and ship it across the country or wherever, and it's very affordable to do so. It doesn't require this elaborate or expensive framing. And in addition to that, I think that there's like this great sort of comfort that comes from the material as well, where you can wrap yourself in these objects if you wanted to, right? And there's something really, I think, special about that. This piece still has resist on it. It still has excess dye. And so once it's washed, all that will run out and the silk will just be one cohesive solid plane, which is different than like a painting where things are layered. This will all just be one piece of material together. Art spaces are complicated. Everything is very complicated. And so to come in to those spaces with this earnestness of just trying to create something that does feel, hopefully that it is for whoever happens to be with it, is important. And there's a responsibility in also challenging those spaces, I think, in some capacity. Lately, I've been really thinking a lot about how the work creates a space for people to feel either consoled or as if they belong. And hearing people talk about the work in that space is resonant to how I feel when I'm making the work, because I'm really not like riddled with any form of like anxious thinking or worry. I'm just existing in the moment and trying to exist in that moment where I feel like I really am in harmony with something that is bigger than myself. So like in here, because the resist is still wet, you can see how that black kind of bleeds out a little bit. And it brings out a special quality in that line where it's still alive and taking its shape during the entire process of the piece. There's just this deep-rooted love for being outside and being connected to the natural world. When I think about that, I think about being in the woods in like cold winter of Minnesota at night, like just wind kind of rolling through, or otherwise very quiet and silent, or looking out at the lake at my grandparents' house, those sort of moments, which I think are universal things that I think I'm always trying to search for just in my daily sort of banal, regular life. I believe in a practice of coming back to something bigger. For me, that's just nature. And art is like a vehicle for that, where it's not the end goal. I think the end goal is just really that moment of being connected and centered, and the challenge within that, and the doubt that comes from that, and the love that one has to instill around the doubt in that, and being okay with like this idea of like unknowing, and allowing for something sort of mysterious and undescribable that I just really believe in at the end of the day.
To see more of his work, check him out at benedictschoyer.com. Next, we meet a Baton Rouge painter with an uncanny talent for capturing her subjects on canvas in more ways than one. In her work, Isoko Onodera strives to reflect not just her subject's physical characteristics, but also what she or he might be feeling in a specific moment in time. Her recent work invites viewers to consider the inner self. Let's learn more about the artist's work and her process.
Each of my paintings have different stories. This painting is about people. We cover the ugly things we do, driven by the human nature, such as survival mechanism or personal greed, but they decide to ignore it by covering this whole ugliness with beautiful things, or buying expensive things and be satisfied, or go to the parties and make small talks. I'm more interested in people emotion. I was doing work until now to address the universality of people, human nature, throughout the time and culture. It doesn't matter where you are from or from what time period you are. Human nature is the same, and we are fundamentally the same, so we can understand each other through empathy and compassion. I think I was overwhelmed by seeing how different people are, because that political situation right now, people are so divided about one thing. Many people has different opinions, almost like polar opinions, strong opinions, and it seems like they can't really persuade each other. It seems like there's no space for empathy and compassion. We grow up, become our own people, and start having different beliefs on things. And that makes living and the world interesting. But also, when I see people from different country, different culture suffering, and there are a group of people who want to help them against people who, okay, so that's your problem, not ours. That really bothers me. So that's why I started thinking, why do we become we? Like, how did I become myself? And that's why I decided to focus on myself and talking about depressions and anxiety issues I have, because since I remember everything I did and all the decisions I made, what I did, how I did, were dictated by my fear and anxiety and depression. I gave an artist talk at the gallery. A person approached me and started asking me about Joey Ramone painting, and he read my writing about him suffering from OCD. He told me that he himself suffers from OCD, and he didn't know Joey Ramone had that condition. He was from New York City. They're from New York City. He thought they were just this mean, tough people that he cannot relate to. But now he sees Joey Ramone in different light, because there was this big common thing between him and Joey, and I also have that. So we talked about OCD for a little bit, and I felt that this kind of the personal connection. Whenever I hear something like that, I think that what I do makes sense. That's why I'm doing what I do. There was a person who commented that there were writings that accompanied each painting, and then she read that and she felt very connected to the paintings I did and how I feel about human nature. Since I gave birth to my son 5 years ago, I get flashbacks from my childhood all the time, and I think the reason why I have the mental issues is that I was brought up in a verbally hostile environment. I was surrounded by more negative reaction to what I did than positive. So I feel like that contributed me forming insecurities and low self-esteem. and I'm habitually self-doubting all the time, and I catch myself saying harsh things to my son sometimes without even thinking, and I really think about it and stop myself, because childhood trauma, I guess it depends on how sensitive that child is. When I'm feeling very depressed and anxious, if I'm painting and if I'm in the zone, it's almost like meditative state. It's escape from the mindset. So I try to do as much as I can so I can keep myself more calm. So yes, painting, like making even just little sketches, helps with my anxiety. I personally am very connected to this piece. Painting eyes is difficult because the eyes reflect lights and their shadows and reflects the things the person's looking at. There are so many things actually going on in this small part. And the color too, it's not just one color. You say, okay, this person's eyes are blue, but when you actually try to paint, if you paint it just flat blue, it's not going to be realistic. And the eye is a sphere, so there are so many the shadows and lights, and then there's in between, and then you have to capture all that to make the eyes look realistic, and not just that inside, like eyeballs, the folds on top of it, underneath it, it is difficult to paint. I overlapped 2 or 3 images because people are constantly moving. It's not just this one still image of like them smiling or standing. Portraiture is not just about eyes, but it's about nose, it's about lips, it's everything. And on top of it, everyone's face is different. I need to paint exactly what is going on the plane of the face. The bone, there's a skull, the face, and there's muscle on top of it, and a cartridge in nose, and skin on top of it. And depending on the age of that person, there will be wrinkles, folds. So there are a lot to consider when you paint a person's face. It's harder to paint someone who's close to me, because you said my husband looks happy in this picture, but to me he doesn't. He's kind of smiling on the surface, but he has his own struggles, and I know about it. Living with him every day, I know when he is truly happy, when he smiles and laughs, and when he's very content. And this is not that smile he has when he is truly happy. It's actually another painting of my husband, but he's in motion. It's his profile, he was moving, and I took these photographs under low light, so it was very blurred. And if you can look at this painting over there, I did 5 paintings total in a series, and they were called blood paintings, like motions in layer. Whenever they go purchase paintings, many people tend to buy whatever that goes with the furniture or carpet, like cut out the carpet, or whatever the style. When the trend's gone, you don't have any use. I hope people will find something more like spiritually or personally relatable to the painting, so that it will be part of you.
To see more of her work, check out isokoonodera.com. Devin Thomas, who is known in the rap and hip-hop world as Trek Manifest, found his rhythm as a toddler by banging on washers and dryers. He found his voice shortly after by creating raps and performing in elementary school talent shows. We were lucky enough to host Trek Manifest in our studio for a recent Broad and High Presents recording session. Take a listen to this inspirational artist.
Go by the name of Trek Manifest. This is the A1 band. Like they say, Trek is the man, but A1 is the band, so we're just here to play a good song for you too, or however you may feel. Just here to uplift your spirits at this time. Name of this song is entitled Tosca's Boy. I love you, Mom. Hey! If you've ever suffered any loss or grief, I'm right there with you. Can only heal if you reveal, so I got you if nobody else does. Yeah, couple ticks from the wrist, time flies, gotta run quick. Feel the grief hitting, had to give that acknowledgement. Black woman, rise, your time is now, cut it quick. Running the world since your existence, raised by a warrior on a prayer tip. Tosca Lynn, where do I begin? Life's been a mess, but respect is given. On any given day, till I see the pearly gates, I wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. This my chance for my advancement. Lost in translation, speaking clear and avid listener. Hearing the words I tell out loud, yell out loud. I got your smile, right? The greatest in the world, right? The thankfulness, the love, this sick, the grief shows me this, cause I love hard and cry quick. I'm not focused on these, boy. I swear I just passed these boys. Look, mama, I'm on a roll again. Healing through revealing in my zone again. Can't feed a closed mouth, nah, my friend. Look, speaking up when I know I can. So I wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Mama's boy with no silver spoon. Less stain on my ignorance, my flesh is doomed. Plus the spirit's on the rise, the sun's coming soon. So it senses out coming, you can read the room. The light shines and steps in when it used to. But I'm getting back to doing what she want them to do. Sorry, I'm third person, 1 minute first person, the next. Over easy like my eggs get. Think about my new stuff, who is this? She raised me better than I've been now. No more breathing machine, she's good now. No more sickle cell, she's good now. She raised a warrior, fight your fight now. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Yeah. Peace of mind on my mind all the time, trying to make sense out of everything. I take time for some time out my mind, out my sight. These thoughts keep lingering. I know, I know, I know, I know, I know there's more. So for now, for now, for now, for now, I leave you with more. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh. me to wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up, wake up, wake up. She told me to wake up.
To hear more, check out trekmanifest.com. Well, that's our show. Remember, you can find all of our stories online at WOSU.org, as well as on our YouTube channel. For all of us here at WOSU, I'm Kate Quickle. Thanks for watching.
I'm a preacher man, that is on me, I'm a preacher man, I'm a preacher man, that is on me, I'm a preacher man, I'm a preacher man, shout is on me, I'm a woo!
Production of Broad and High is funded in part by the Greater Columbus Arts Council, celebrating expression, fostering talent, and connecting the community to Columbus artists, performances, exhibitions, concerts, public art, and more at columbusmakesart.com.